This is the story of how I turned a hobby into a full-blown business, against all odds, and learned some hard lessons along the way. I've never shared this publicly, but I think it might help someone out there who's thinking of taking the leap. Buckle up, it's a wild ride. It all started in 2013. I had just finished college and, like most of my peers, was unsure about what to do next. I didn't have the luxury of a dream job waiting for me. I was working part-time at a coffee shop, just trying to pay the bills, while dealing with the reality that I wasn't doing anything I was passionate about. A lot of the people I worked with seemed to be in the same boat, and it kind of felt like we were all just treading water, waiting for something big to happen. The thing is, I had a side hobby that always kept me sane during that period: photography. It wasn't anything professional at first. I would go around my neighborhood, take pictures of random things, play with different settings on my camera, and just experiment. Eventually, my Instagram account became more active, and I started getting some attention. At first, it was just friends and family complimenting me on my shots, but soon I began getting messages from strangers asking if I sold prints of my work. I had never really thought about turning it into a business. To me, photography was just an outlet, a way to escape the monotony of everyday life. But the idea began to nag at me. Could I actually sell my photos? Could this be a viable side hustle? And if I pursued this, could I make enough money to not need that dead-end coffee shop job anymore? In early 2014, I decided to test the waters. I took a handful of my best photos, made a simple website, and created an Etsy shop to sell prints. The shop wasn't much: a basic layout, a few photos on offer, and a promise of high-quality prints. I had zero expectations. I thought maybe, just maybe, a few people might buy something. I would have been happy with even a single sale, honestly. But then, something unexpected happened. My first sale came within a few weeks. It wasn't someone I knew, either. Just a random person who had found me through Instagram. I was ecstatic. The fact that someone saw value in my work enough to pay for it blew my mind. After that, a few more sales trickled in. It wasn't a flood of orders, but it was enough to make me think, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. However, this was the easy part. As the months went by, I started realizing just how much effort it would take to run a photography business. The first challenge was simple: the photography itself. I had a decent camera, but I quickly learned that owning a camera didn't automatically make you a professional photographer. I needed to learn how to shoot consistently, how to edit my photos so they looked polished, and how to experiment with new techniques. It was frustrating. Every time I thought I had mastered something, I'd find out there was more to learn. Then there was the business side of things. How do you get noticed in an oversaturated market? I knew that I had to market myself effectively, but I had no idea where to start. I tried everything: running Facebook ads, engaging with people on Instagram, reaching out to blogs for features, but it felt like I was just spinning my wheels. There were months where I barely made any sales, and I wondered if it was even worth it. But I refused to quit. I knew I was onto something, but I had to figure out what was missing. I did more research, and I began focusing on building an email list. I started offering free digital downloads for people who subscribed, which eventually turned into a steady stream of leads. Slowly, I began to build a community of people who appreciated my work and wanted to support me. It wasn't fast, but it was progress. The breakthrough came in late 2015 when I decided to make a big investment. I wanted to take my business to the next level, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. So, I hired a part-time assistant to help with customer service and packing orders. That was a huge decision for me because it meant giving up a chunk of my profit. But it also meant I could focus more on the creative side of things, which ultimately led to more product releases and better content. By 2017, my Etsy shop was bringing in enough money that I could quit my day job. It wasn't easy, and I still had a lot to learn. But at that point, I felt confident that I had built something real. I was no longer just a hobbyist taking photos in my free time. I was a full-time photographer and business owner. And while I had moments of doubt, moments where I questioned if I was doing the right thing, I never looked back. In the years that followed, my business grew steadily. I branched out into offering photography workshops, selling digital products like presets, and even offering limited edition collections. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. In 2019, I made a major mistake that almost cost me everything. I got cocky. After a particularly good year of sales, I started to believe that I had everything figured out. I invested heavily in new equipment and started expanding my product range without really considering whether there was demand for it. I had a couple of months where I didn't sell much of anything, and my expenses were piling up. That's when the reality hit me. Running a business means being able to pivot when things aren't going well, and I hadn't done that. I had been so focused on scaling that I forgot about the basics. The next year was a tough one. I had to scale back, get rid of some inventory, and really refocus on what made me successful in the first place. I learned to be more deliberate in my spending and more strategic about my growth. Fortunately, I was able to weather the storm, but it was a painful lesson. Today, my business is more stable than ever. I've learned to balance creative passion with the practicalities of running a business. I still face challenges, but now I approach them with the knowledge that every failure is an opportunity to learn. I'm proud of how far I've come, but I also know that there's always room for improvement. If you're thinking of starting a business, especially something creative, my advice is this: don't expect instant success. Don't think that just because you have a skill or passion that everything will fall into place. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes resilience. And when things get tough, and they will get tough, remember that it's not the end. It's just part of the process. But most importantly, don't quit. The road will be bumpy, and there will be moments where you'll want to throw in the towel. But if you keep pushing, keep learning, and keep improving, you'll make it. Believe me, it's worth it. End of story. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. My journey into entrepreneurship wasn't a straight path. In fact, if you told me 10 years ago that I'd be running my own successful business, I would have laughed. But looking back, it was a series of small, seemingly insignificant steps that led me to where I am today. Here's my story. Hope it resonates with anyone out there trying to find their way. I grew up in a small town, and like many kids in my situation, I was told from a young age that I needed to get a solid education and secure a stable job. My parents didn't have the means to send me to an Ivy League school, but they did everything they could to make sure I had the opportunity to get an education. I worked part-time jobs in high school, doing everything from waitressing to working at the local grocery store, just to save up enough money to pay for college. I ended up going to a state university and majored in business administration. I was never a tech person, no coding or graphic design for me. I loved business because it felt like a way to solve problems and create something bigger than myself. However, the reality of life after college hit hard. I graduated during the recession in 2009, when jobs were scarce. I ended up taking a position as a marketing assistant at a small tech company, earning barely enough to cover rent and student loans. I spent a few years working in various marketing roles, learning the ropes of the business world. But I was frustrated. I felt like I was stuck in a cycle of doing the same things day after day, with little to no room for growth. The company I worked for was run by well-meaning people, but they lacked vision. They had good products but didn't know how to sell them. And the more I observed, the more I realized that there were a lot of inefficiencies in the way they operated. That's when I had my first aha moment. I started freelancing on the side, offering digital marketing services to small businesses that couldn't afford to hire full-time marketing teams. The work was slow at first. I built a website, ran some ads, created social media content. But the results spoke for themselves. I was bringing in more leads, more customers, and helping businesses grow in ways they hadn't been able to do on their own. I saw an opportunity. I could scale this. I could turn my side hustle into something bigger. But, of course, there were challenges. The first one was the internal struggle. I was comfortable in my job, even if I wasn't fulfilled. I had health benefits, a steady paycheck, and security. Walking away from that to pursue something uncertain was terrifying. I had to ask myself, what's the worst that could happen? The worst, I decided, was that I'd fail and end up back in a regular job. But I wouldn't regret trying. So I took the plunge. I quit my job, took a leap of faith, and started my digital marketing agency. My first client was a local restaurant that needed help with online advertising. The restaurant owner was skeptical, but I offered to run a month-long campaign for free in exchange for a testimonial if it worked. To my surprise, it worked. The restaurant saw a 30% increase in foot traffic within just 2 weeks. That testimonial led to more clients, and within 6 months, I had enough work to hire a part-time employee. That was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. The next few years were a whirlwind of growth, learning, and mistakes. I quickly realized that while I had a knack for marketing, I didn't know much about running a business. I had no experience with managing cash flow, hiring employees, or scaling operations. I made countless mistakes. I hired the wrong people, mismanaged funds, and even lost clients due to my lack of experience. But every failure taught me something new. I learned the importance of building a team you can trust, of setting clear expectations, and of managing cash flow carefully. I also learned that networking is everything. I started attending conferences and events, meeting other entrepreneurs, and learning from their successes and failures. Over time, I built a network of mentors who were willing to guide me. By year 3, I was making a profit, but I still wasn't quite where I wanted to be. I had built a small but steady clientele, and my agency was growing, but I felt like I needed to diversify. That's when I decided to branch out into product creation. We had been running marketing campaigns for other businesses, but I realized that we had the expertise to create our own products, digital products that could generate passive income. We started with ebooks, guides, and online courses. We created content around marketing strategies, building brands, and growing businesses. The first course I created didn't do great, but it didn't matter. I used the feedback to improve it, and by the time the second course launched, it sold much better. The passive income from those products allowed me to reinvest in the agency and eventually expand into new niches. I also started building a personal brand, sharing my entrepreneurial journey on social media. I didn't just talk about the successes, I was open about the struggles too. I shared the late nights, the sleepless weeks, and the mistakes I made along the way. Over time, I attracted a loyal following of aspiring entrepreneurs who resonated with my story. Now, after nearly a decade of hard work, my agency is doing well. We've grown from a small side hustle to a full-fledged business with a team of 20. I've been able to hire people who are smarter and more skilled than I am in various areas, and I'm finally able to focus on the parts of the business that I enjoy: strategy, marketing, and coaching. I've even started mentoring others who are looking to start their own businesses. But the most rewarding part of this journey has been the personal growth. I've learned to embrace failure, to take calculated risks, and to trust in my ability to adapt. I've learned that success doesn't happen overnight, and that the most important thing is to keep going, even when it feels like you're not making progress. Because progress is often slower than you think, but every small step forward adds up. Looking back, I realized that entrepreneurship is not a linear path. It's full of ups and downs, and there are no guarantees. But for anyone who is sitting on the fence, unsure whether to take that leap, I can tell you this: it's worth it. The fear of failure is real, but so is the reward of creating something that is entirely your own. If you have a vision and the willingness to put in the work, you can make it happen. Today, I'm not just an entrepreneur, I'm a problem solver. And I've never been more excited about what the future holds. The journey is far from over, but I've learned to embrace the adventure. The road to success may be long and winding, but the lessons along the way are invaluable. I've always considered myself a risk taker. From a young age, I didn't shy away from trying new things, even if it meant failing or looking foolish. But my journey into entrepreneurship didn't come easy, and it wasn't something I could have predicted. In fact, the idea of starting my own business didn't even cross my mind until much later in life. Let me rewind a little. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that's what kept me going as a kid. My parents were hard workers, both having blue-collar jobs. My dad was a mechanic, and my mom worked at the local grocery store. Money was always tight, but we never went without. Still, there was never much room for dreams beyond making ends meet. When I finished high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. Like many young people, I felt pressure to figure it out, but nothing seemed to stick. I went to college, mostly because it was expected. I wasn't passionate about anything specific, but I figured I would figure it out eventually. I majored in business because it seemed like a safe bet, a way to open doors in the future. After graduating, I did what many others do: I got a job. I started working at a small marketing agency in a mid-sized city nearby. I was doing things like copywriting, social media management, and brainstorming ad ideas. It was a solid gig, but I hated the rigidity. I remember sitting at my desk, day after day, wondering if this was it. I spent my lunch breaks on Reddit, reading about people who had built successful businesses from scratch, and I'd dream about doing the same. But it all seemed so far-fetched. One day, a former colleague reached out to me. He had started his own tech company, and he needed help with marketing. He had a couple of investors backing him and seemed to be doing well. I was intrigued, but more than anything, I was jealous. How did he go from working in the same agency as me to running his own startup? He offered me a decent paycheck and the chance to work remotely. That seemed like a win-win. But deep down, I knew something was missing. I was helping him market his product, but I wasn't truly invested in it. It wasn't my idea, my vision. I had the skills, but I didn't have the passion. That's when it hit me. I didn't want to work for someone else. I didn't want to just be a cog in the wheel. I wanted to create something of my own. The idea of starting my own business had always felt too daunting. The risk, the uncertainty, the responsibility, it was all overwhelming. But after working with my colleague and seeing him build something from scratch, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I could do the same. If he could do it, why couldn't I? I spent months obsessing over ideas. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I knew I had the skills to create something in the marketing space, but I didn't want to just be another agency. I wanted something more personal, more hands-on, something I could be proud of. That's when I came up with the idea of a content creation platform for small businesses. It was a simple concept. Many small businesses struggle to produce high-quality content consistently, and they often can't afford to hire big agencies or full-time employees. My idea was to create a platform where business owners could get access to affordable, professional content, whether it was blogs, social media posts, or even videos tailored to their business's needs. I would build a team of freelance writers, graphic designers, and video editors who could produce this content for businesses on a subscription model. It sounded promising, but it also sounded terrifying. I didn't have a lot of savings. In fact, I barely had enough to cover my bills each month. I had no investors lined up, no backup plan. But I knew that if I didn't take the leap, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So I did what any responsible adult would do. I took a risk. I quit my job and started the business with what little money I had saved up. I built a basic website, put together a few sample pieces of content, and started reaching out to small businesses. I focused on businesses that were already active online but needed more help with content. The first few months were tough. I had no brand recognition, no social media following, and I was still figuring out the technical side of running a business. But I hustled. I sent cold emails, made phone calls, and attended networking events. I offered discounts and even worked for free to get my first few clients. Slowly, the work started coming in. The first client was a local yoga studio that needed blog posts and social media updates. They were thrilled with the content I provided, and they referred me to a couple of other businesses. I kept pushing, kept learning, and kept refining my processes. The more clients I worked with, the more I realized that I wasn't just building a business, I was building relationships. The success of my platform wasn't just about the content I produced, but about the trust one established with my clients. They began to rely on me not only for content, but for advice, for ideas, for strategies. I became a partner, not just a service provider. As the business grew, so did my confidence. I started hiring freelancers to help with the workload. I made sure to pick people who were just as passionate about small businesses as I was. I wanted a team that would treat each project like it was their own, not just another job to check off the list. One of the biggest challenges I faced was scaling. As the client base grew, so did the complexity of managing projects. I had to invest in better tools, create a more efficient system for onboarding clients, and find ways to stay on top of deadlines without burning out. It wasn't easy, but I learned quickly that growth requires adaptation. I couldn't do it all on my own. I had to trust my team and delegate. Fast forward a few years, and I now have a thriving business. We've worked with over 100 small businesses, from local coffee shops to online retailers. The platform has evolved into something bigger than I ever anticipated, and I'm incredibly proud of what we've built. We've expanded our services, and I now have a small but dedicated team that helps run the operations. I can't say it's been a smooth ride. There have been ups and downs, months where I wondered if I'd make it through, moments where I questioned every decision I made. But every setback taught me something. Every mistake was a lesson. I've learned how to pivot, how to negotiate, how to keep going even when things look bleak. Looking back, I realized that the greatest lesson I learned on this journey wasn't about business strategies or marketing tactics. It was about believing in myself and taking that first step into the unknown. It was about trusting that, even if I failed, I could get back up and try again. Starting my own business was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also been the most rewarding. And while I can't say I've figured everything out, I do know one thing. Taking the leap was the best decision I ever made. If you're sitting there thinking about starting something of your own, I encourage you to take the risk. It's scary, yes, But nothing worth having comes easy. And who knows? You might just find yourself looking back one day, amazed at how far you've come. I was 23 when I started my first business, and in the process, I learned a lot about myself, business, and what it takes to make it. It wasn't easy, but I wouldn't change a thing. Let me take you through the journey. At the time, I had just finished college. I wasn't one of those people who had their whole life planned out with a neat job waiting for them. Honestly, I didn't even know what I wanted to do, and I didn't have a clear vision of what success looked like. But I did know one thing for sure. I didn't want to work in a cubicle, answering to some boss who didn't understand what it was like to have big dreams. So, I started dabbling in side hustles. First, it was reselling products on eBay and Amazon. Nothing major, just small, one-off sales to test the waters. Then, I thought, why not start a business that actually meant something to me, something I could really get passionate about? One night, I was talking with a friend over a beer at a local bar when the idea hit me. We were discussing the frustrations we both had with finding quality, affordable phone accessories. At the time, the market was flooded with generic, overpriced products, and most of the options didn't even work that well. I thought to myself, why not create a brand that offered high-quality phone accessories at a reasonable price and made sure the products were as good as they could be? It sounded simple at the time, but I had no experience in e-commerce, no background in product development, and definitely no capital to speak of. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I could do this. I could build a brand that people trusted and genuinely wanted to buy from. I took the leap. I took the $1,500 I had saved up from my side hustles and put it all into launching my first product, a phone case. I found a manufacturer in China who could create custom cases with a premium feel. I spent hours upon hours designing the packaging, creating the website, and building an Instagram account. I was doing everything myself, learning as I went. The first few months were incredibly tough. I was working full-time at a part-time job during the day, coming home at night, and then working on my business until the early hours of the morning. I didn't have a team. I didn't have a business partner. It was all on me, and it was draining. But I pushed forward. I had no choice but to believe in myself because I was all I had. After a few months of trial and error, I finally saw my first sale come through. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. Someone, somewhere, had seen my product and trusted me enough to buy it. That moment is etched in my memory. It was the first time I felt like, okay, this could actually work. But then came the real test. In the first year, my sales were modest, and my profit margins were razor thin. I was living off ramen noodles and cheap coffee just to keep the business afloat. Every dollar that came in went straight back into inventory, advertising, and building the website. There were months where I barely broke even, and there were months where I almost thought about calling it quits. But then, something clicked. I started experimenting with different ad campaigns on Facebook and Instagram. I posted consistently on social media, trying to build a community around my brand. I knew that if I could get a few customers to tell their friends about my products, it would snowball. I didn't have the budget for expensive influencers, so I reached out to smaller accounts and offered them free products in exchange for reviews. And it worked. Slowly but surely, my brand started to gain traction. People were tagging their friends in posts, sharing pictures of my products, and giving me honest feedback. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. I was building a brand based on customer trust, not just a quick sale. By the end of the second year, I had expanded my product line. I went from just phone cases to including things like wireless chargers, Bluetooth earphones, and screen protectors. I found manufacturers who could meet my growing demand, and I started refining my designs. I realized that the key to success wasn't just in creating great products. It was in creating a great experience for my customers. I began to invest in my packaging and made sure every interaction a customer had with my brand felt personal and valued. Then came the third year, and that's when the floodgates opened. I started seeing real growth. I invested in better advertising, got my products into more eyes, and most importantly, I started reinvesting more profit into scaling up. I hired a small team, people who could help me with customer service, inventory management, and even graphic design. I stopped trying to do everything myself and learned the importance of delegation. This was when I learned the hard way that you can't grow if you try to do it all alone. Things got easier, but I still faced constant challenges. I had issues with suppliers who didn't meet deadlines, customer complaints, and inventory shortages. There was never a time when things were perfect. But the difference between now and then was that I had a system in place. I wasn't flying by the seat of my pants anymore. I had processes for handling customer complaints, I had a solid marketing strategy, and most importantly, I had a brand that people trusted. By the fourth year, my company had grown far beyond what I ever thought possible. We were generating six figures in revenue, and I finally felt like I had made it. I was able to step away from my part-time job and focus entirely on my business. I had learned the ins and outs of running an e-commerce brand, and I was proud of what I had built from scratch. But even then, I didn't rest on my laurels. I kept pushing. I kept innovating. I launched new products, expanded into international markets, and built an email list that allowed me to connect directly with my customers. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. There were so many times I wanted to give up, and so many obstacles that almost stopped me in my tracks. But it was my passion, my willingness to fail, and my belief that I could figure it out that kept me going. There's no shortcut to success, and no easy road. But if you put in the work, believe in yourself, and keep pushing, you'll eventually get there. That was the story of my first business. Today, it's still growing, and I've even started other ventures. But that first experience taught me lessons that I carry with me every day. So if you're reading this and you're on the fence about taking the leap, do it. Take that first step. Because if you don't, you'll never know what could have been. It was a rainy Thursday when I decided to take the plunge. I had been thinking about starting my own business for months, but the timing never seemed right. There were always too many things I needed to prepare for. The what-ifs loomed over me, and the pressure of the day-to-day kept me stuck. I had a steady 9-to-5 job in marketing, a salary that paid the bills, and the occasional happy hour with colleagues. Life felt comfortable. But in the back of my mind, I always knew something was missing. I knew I had more to give. The idea for my business didn't come to me in a moment of brilliance. It wasn't some light bulb moment that hit me while I was taking a shower or during a late-night epiphany. No, it was something I had noticed over time. It had been building in the background, quietly and persistently. I had worked with several brands in my marketing career, and one of the common issues I kept seeing was that they struggled to maintain a cohesive digital presence. They'd have a great product, but their online strategy was all over the place. This didn't just affect small businesses. Even large companies, ones that you'd expect to have it all figured out, seemed to be missing the mark in the digital world. Whether it was the lack of engaging social media content, poorly designed websites, or a disjointed brand voice, it felt like there was a huge gap in the market for a service that could help businesses create a seamless, cohesive digital identity. That was the idea I decided to run with. But then came the most terrifying question. How do you start a business? It's easy to daydream about your own company, but when it comes to execution, it's a whole different story. I had no experience in running a business. I had no investors lined up. I had no office space. I didn't even have a logo. But I had a vision. The first step was the hardest. I quit my job. That's not something you do lightly, especially when you have a stable income and health insurance. But I was tired of living in a state of paralysis. I knew I couldn't keep waiting for the perfect moment because I knew that moment would never come. So, I took a deep breath, typed up my resignation letter, and handed it in. My heart raced as I left the office that day. There was no going back. I was officially on my own. The first few weeks were a blur of excitement, fear, and self-doubt. I spent my days reading everything I could find about entrepreneurship, digital marketing, branding, and anything else that I thought might help me. But for all the knowledge I was gaining, there was one thing I couldn't learn from a book: how to actually get clients. At first, I tried the traditional approach: cold emails, phone calls, and LinkedIn messages. But nothing really stuck. I would send out dozens of emails, only to hear back from a few. Most of those responses were polite rejections. I started to feel discouraged. But then, I had an idea. Instead of trying to sell my services to strangers, what if I showed them what I could do? What if I built a portfolio by offering free services to a few local businesses in exchange for testimonials? It was a risk, but I had nothing to lose at that point. I reached out to a handful of small businesses in my area and offered to redesign their websites, improve their social media profiles, or work on their branding. I made sure to position it as an opportunity for them to get a taste of what I could do, with no obligation. To my surprise, a few businesses took me up on the offer. The work I did for them was far from perfect. I made mistakes, spent too much time tweaking designs, and even second-guessed myself more times than I care to admit. But the results were undeniable. The businesses I worked with saw an increase in traffic, engagement, and most importantly, a better brand image. They were happy with the results, and they wrote glowing testimonials. The next step was taking those testimonials and putting them front and center on my website. I didn't have a big budget for advertising, so word of mouth became my biggest asset. Slowly, but surely, the clients started coming in. I would work on one project, deliver results, and then another referral would follow. But running a business wasn't just about getting clients, it was about managing them. The first few months were a chaotic whirlwind of juggling multiple projects at once. I found myself working late nights, struggling to keep up with deadlines, and questioning whether I was even cut out for this. There were moments where I felt overwhelmed, especially when clients would call with last-minute changes or unrealistic expectations. But I kept pushing through. I built systems to stay organized, hired a freelancer to help with the overflow, and slowly learned to manage my time better. I also realized that I needed to start charging what I was worth. For the first few months, I had underpriced my services just to get my foot in the door, but that wasn't sustainable. As my business grew, so did my confidence. I started networking more, attending local meetups, and making connections with other entrepreneurs. One of the most valuable lessons I learned was that you don't have to do it all alone. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking you need to have all the answers, but in reality, surrounding yourself with other like-minded people can be incredibly beneficial. One of the biggest turning points in my business came when I started to see the results of my work reflected in my clients' success stories. I had helped a local cafe increase their online orders by 40%. I had worked with a boutique clothing store that grew their Instagram following by 300%. Every success felt like a small victory, but those victories added up. At some point, I hired a small team of freelancers to help with content creation, graphic design, and social media management. I could now take on bigger projects without losing the personal touch that had initially set me apart. I started offering more comprehensive packages, and my business began to scale. Looking back now, almost 5 years later, I can't believe how far I've come. My business is thriving. We have a growing team, a steady stream of clients, and a strong online presence. I still get imposter syndrome from time to time, but it's nowhere near as paralyzing as it was when I first started. If you had told me back then that I would be here today, I would have laughed. I never thought I had what it took to be an entrepreneur. But the truth is, none of us really know what we're capable of until we take that first step. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that taking risks, even small ones, can lead to incredible opportunities. Sure, there were plenty of sleepless nights and moments where I thought I was in over my head, but looking back, it was all worth it. So, to anyone out there on the fence about starting their own business, you can do it. It won't be easy, and it won't always go according to plan. But if you keep learning, keep pushing, and keep believing in yourself, there's no limit to what you can achieve. The hardest part is just taking that first step. And honestly, that step was the best decision I ever made. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, and the idea of starting a business seemed like something that only big city folks could pull off. My parents were middle class, my dad worked in construction, and my mom was a teacher. They always emphasized hard work and doing what you love, but no one in our town really talked about entrepreneurship. Sure, there were local businesses, but those were mostly small mom-and-pop shops that had been around for years, and nobody seemed to be getting rich off of them. They were just a way of making a living. When I was in high school, I was the kind of kid who loved to tinker with things, computers, gadgets, anything that had wires or code. I spent most of my free time messing around with my old desktop, trying to figure out how it worked. But no one really cared about tech stuff in my town. The only thing anyone cared about was farming, construction, or small retail. But for some reason, I had this idea in my head that there was more to life than that. I remember the first time I realized that building something could actually lead to financial freedom. It was when I was 16. I had just saved up enough money to buy my first decent laptop, and I found this online course about web development. The idea of creating something on a computer that could reach people all over the world fascinated me. The fact that I could make money from home and not have to follow the traditional route of getting a degree and working for someone else made the whole thing feel like a golden ticket. I spent hours after school learning how to code. I would watch tutorials, write simple websites, and even build a few basic apps just for fun. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. I started freelancing in small online forums, doing websites for people who wanted to create simple blogs or personal pages. I charged next to nothing, just enough to buy the next course or upgrade my gear. Fast forward to the end of high school. I wasn't one of those kids who knew exactly what I wanted to do in life, but I knew I didn't want to go the usual route. My parents encouraged me to go to college, but I wasn't sold. I wanted to keep building my skills and focus on something I could actually start working on right away. I decided to drop out of college after my first semester. That was a big move, especially in a small town where college was seen as the ticket to success. My friends and family didn't get it. "You're throwing away your future," they said. But I felt like I had to follow this gut feeling I had. The world was changing. There was this new wave of technology, and I could feel the opportunity in it. I started a small web development business from my bedroom. At first, things were slow. I had a couple of small clients who needed websites, but they were low-budget projects. It was hard to make ends meet. I was living off ramen noodles and coffee, and most nights, I stayed up until 3 a.m. coding. I'd pitch my services to anyone who would listen, and slowly but surely, I started getting a few bigger clients. They weren't the high-paying ones yet, but they were people with potential, and they saw something in my work. The breakthrough came when I created a website for a local business owner who owned a small chain of coffee shops. It was a simple site, nothing too fancy, but it had the necessary features: a menu, location finder, online ordering, and a blog. She loved it, and so did her customers. Word started spreading, and soon enough, other local business owners were calling me to create websites for them. At this point, I was working 18-hour days, juggling multiple clients, and slowly realizing that I couldn't keep doing everything myself. I needed to scale. The thought of hiring employees scared me at first. I didn't want to risk it. But the more I grew, the more I realized I had to step outside my comfort zone. I hired my first full-time employee, a designer, who helped take some of the load off my plate. The first few months with the new hire were rough. I had to learn how to manage someone else, handle payroll, and keep the business organized. I made a ton of mistakes, missed deadlines, undercharged for services, and failed to properly communicate with clients about what they could expect. It wasn't glamorous, but I was learning. As we built more websites, I started seeing the opportunity to expand beyond just basic web development. I began offering digital marketing services, SEO, and social media management. I took a few online courses to learn about digital advertising and analytics. The idea was to become a one-stop shop for small businesses that needed help not just with a website, but with getting traffic and customers online. It worked. More clients started reaching out to me, and soon, I was able to hire more people: developers, designers, and marketers. By the time I turned 25, my small web development business had grown into a full-service digital marketing agency with 15 employees. We had clients from all over the country, and some of them were even big-name companies that had stumbled upon us through word of mouth. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. By then, I had learned that running a business isn't just about getting clients and making money. It's about managing people, cash flow, and staying on top of the market. I dealt with burnout, tough financial decisions, and the stress of trying to stay competitive in an ever-changing industry. There were moments when I felt like throwing in the towel, especially when clients were unhappy or when our revenue was tight. What kept me going was the same thing that kept me coding as a teenager: the passion for creating something meaningful. I loved building businesses, but even more, I loved solving problems. Whether it was helping a coffee shop owner reach more customers or creating a marketing strategy that actually worked, it felt like I was making a real impact. By the time I hit 30, the business had surpassed 6 figures in revenue. But success wasn't just about the money. It was about the lessons I learned and the people I had helped along the way. I hired more people who were passionate about the same things I was: building businesses and solving problems. Our team became a close-knit family, and I realized that I wasn't just running a business anymore. I was leading a group of people who wanted to make a difference. I never expected to be where I am today. There were a million moments when I could have quit or gone down a different path. But looking back, I know that the most important thing I did was trust my instincts. I built my business from the ground up, with nothing but a laptop and the belief that I could create something bigger than myself. In the end, entrepreneurship wasn't just about making money. It was about proving to myself that I could create something that could change the world, one line of code at a time. I was 22 when I decided to take the leap. It wasn't a dramatic moment of brilliance, more like a slow, creeping realization that my life wasn't going in the direction I wanted. I had been working at a dead-end job in retail for almost a year, trying to pay off student loans that seemed to only grow as my paycheck barely covered the bills. I had always dreamed of owning a business, but like most people, I thought it was something only other people could achieve. people with more money, experience, or connections than I had. I wasn't even sure what kind of business I wanted to run at first, but I knew I wanted to be my own boss. The idea of answering to no one, having control over my future, it all seemed so appealing. After weeks of deep thinking and Googling, I realized one thing. I wanted to open an online store. At the time, e-commerce was booming. Everyone seemed to be buying stuff online, and the convenience factor was undeniable. I was obsessed with finding a product that I could sell, but I had no idea where to start. I spent hours researching, reading blogs, and watching YouTube videos on how to launch an online store. The first thing I did was create a simple Shopify account. It felt exciting, but also incredibly overwhelming. I remember sitting at my desk at home, staring at the screen and wondering where to go from there. I had zero experience with website design, marketing, or even the product I wanted to sell. But I was determined. After weeks of going back and forth, I settled on a niche: sustainable, eco-friendly products. It wasn't a groundbreaking idea, but I thought it would resonate with people. After all, more and more consumers were becoming conscious of the environment. I started small, sourcing reusable water bottles, bamboo toothbrushes, and other sustainable products. I had no idea if it would work, but I figured it was worth a shot. The first few months were brutal. I spent hours on social media, trying to grow an audience, and posting daily on Instagram and Facebook. I remember getting frustrated when I posted about new products, and no one seemed to care. There was no engagement, no likes, no comments, just silence. The sales were slow to come in, and I was quickly burning through the little savings I had. But I kept pushing. I invested in paid ads, took a crash course on Facebook advertising, and learned how to tweak my campaigns. I ran promotions, held giveaways, and even reached out to influencers, offering them free products in exchange for shoutouts. Slowly but surely, I started to see some traction. My followers grew, my sales picked up, and the dream that had felt so distant was beginning to feel real. However, success didn't come without its challenges. The first major setback hit when I received a bulk order of eco-friendly products, only to discover that the supplier had shipped me the wrong items. Instead of the bamboo toothbrushes I had ordered, they sent plastic ones. I remember feeling sick to my stomach. I had no idea how I was going to explain this to my customers, let alone the money I had just spent on the wrong inventory. But instead of panicking, I took action. I refunded customers who had received the wrong products, communicated openly about the mistake, and offered them a discount on their next order. The supplier refunded me for the faulty batch, but it still felt like a blow. That wasn't the last challenge I faced. As my business grew, I started running into logistical problems. My inventory management system was all over the place. I was handling packaging and shipping out of my small apartment, and it was getting chaotic. I remember spending entire weekends just fulfilling orders and trying to keep everything organized. But even as these challenges piled up, I started seeing the fruits of my labor. After about 6 months, I was making enough money to quit my day job. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give me the confidence to go all in. I rented a small office space, hired my first employee, and slowly began building a team. By the end of my first year, my business had grown faster than I could have imagined. I had expanded my product range, built relationships with suppliers, and started working on improving my website and branding. My sales had skyrocketed, and I was no longer worried about paying the bills. I even started saving money, something I never thought would happen when I was working retail. Looking back now, it feels surreal. The hard work, the late nights, the moments when I wanted to give up, those are all a part of the story. But what stands out more than the struggles are the moments when things finally clicked. When a new product launch took off, when an influencer shared my brand with their followers, when a customer left a glowing review. Those moments made it all worth it. As my business continued to grow, I expanded beyond just eco-friendly products. I started to develop my own brand and product line. I partnered with other sustainable brands, launched subscription boxes, and even started offering consulting to other aspiring entrepreneurs. But through it all, I never forgot where I started. The sleepless nights, the trial and error, and the constant feeling of not knowing if it would work. Fast forward to today, and my business is thriving. We've moved into a much larger warehouse, and my team has grown to include several full-time employees. We've launched an international shipping service, and our revenue has grown exponentially year over year. My life looks nothing like it did when I was working retail, and every day still feels like a new adventure. The key takeaway from all of this? Persistence. I never gave up, even when it felt like the odds were stacked against me. And that's not to say it was easy. It wasn't. But it was worth it. If you're sitting there, wondering if you should take the plunge, I say go for it. You don't have to have everything figured out from the start. You just have to keep going, keep learning, and keep adapting. The rest will follow. In the end, the entrepreneurial journey is never linear. There will be setbacks, mistakes, and unexpected challenges. But it's in those moments that you learn the most. And as long as you're willing to embrace the journey, the destination will be more than worth it. And to anyone out there still working that dead-end job, I want to say this. You have the power to change your life. You just have to believe in yourself and take that first step, because you never know where it might lead. I was 27, broke, and living with my mom when I first started my business. My name is Josh, and I never thought I'd be a business owner, let alone one who would eventually sell a company for a life-changing amount of money. I wasn't some kid who had a silver spoon in his mouth. I came from a middle-class family, where every dollar was stretched thin and every decision was calculated. But that year, everything changed. It all started in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, where I was living with a few college friends after graduating from a state university. I had a degree in marketing and a vague sense of purpose, but no real plan. I did the usual stuff, applied for jobs, went on interviews, and even took a couple of marketing internships. But nothing felt right. Every office I walked into, I saw people trapped in their own little cubicles, churning through the motions. The thought of spending the next 40 years doing the same thing terrified me. One night, I was talking to my buddy Eric, who was working at a startup. He was always the one who had all the big ideas, and while he was still working 9 to 5, he had a spark of ambition I admired. He started talking about his side hustle, an online store selling custom-made t-shirts. He'd been doing it for a few months, but wasn't seeing the traction he wanted. He was trying to sell shirts with quirky, funny quotes on them, but it wasn't enough to make a dent. That conversation lit a fire under me. I thought, I can do better than that. I knew I could. I'd always been interested in e-commerce and had even run a small drop-shipping store during college, but it didn't work out. The first lesson I learned was that running a business was hard. However, this time, I knew I had to go all in. I told Eric about my idea, and he was intrigued, though a bit skeptical. I had spent months reading every book I could find on digital marketing, e-commerce, and branding. I wanted to build something bigger than just a store selling random stuff. I envisioned creating a brand with a message, something people could get behind. I wanted it to feel personal, to have a story people could relate to. After weeks of brainstorming, I decided I'd sell custom-designed, high-quality sweatshirts with inspirational quotes, but not just the usual live, laugh, love garbage. These would be motivational, but with a twist, things like stop waiting, start doing, or dream big, work harder. Quotes that resonated with the frustration of people who felt like they were stuck in a rut, just like I had been. The first few months were brutal. I spent all my time working on designs, sourcing suppliers, and figuring out how to build the website. I used Shopify, and after a few sleepless nights, I had a basic store up and running. I knew I needed a marketing strategy that would cut through the noise. Facebook ads were the obvious answer, but I had no budget. So, I spent hours crafting the perfect ad copy and finding free design resources to create eye-catching graphics. Every penny I had went into paying for ads, hoping that just one sale would validate my idea. The first sale came after about 2 weeks. It was a random person I didn't know, which was both terrifying and exhilarating. I couldn't believe it. Someone liked my sweatshirt enough to buy it. It felt like a huge win, even though I wasn't making any money yet. I kept pushing, tweaking my ads, changing up the designs, and testing new strategies. Slowly but surely, the orders started to trickle in. By the end of the first month, I had made 50 sales. Not a lot, but enough to keep me going. But I didn't stop there. I knew that in order to scale this thing, I had to expand. I started doing influencer marketing, reaching out to small Instagram accounts with engaged followings. I'd offer them free products in exchange for honest reviews and shoutouts. It worked. People started noticing the brand, and I began gaining followers. Sales started coming in steadily, and I was able to hire my first employee, an amazing woman named Sarah, who helped me with customer service and managing the orders. Fast forward a year, and I had built something bigger than I could have ever imagined. My little side hustle had turned into a 6-figure business. I had a team of 5 people, including a graphic designer, a social media manager, and an operations manager. We were expanding our product line, and our brand was starting to get recognized by influencers in the fitness and wellness space. But this wasn't the moment I truly realized what I had built. That happened a few months later when I received a message on Instagram from a well-known investor who had seen our ads and was intrigued by the potential of the business. He wanted to meet. Long story short, after a series of meetings and negotiations, I sold the business for a significant sum. It was life-changing money, more than I ever thought possible. The best part wasn't the money, though. It was the realization that the dream I had when I first started, the belief that I could build something out of nothing, had come true. I had created a brand, built a community, and learned more about myself than I ever thought possible. In the years that followed, I've invested in a few other businesses and started a podcast where I talk about my experiences. I love sharing my story because I know it can inspire others who are in the same position I was, uncertain, afraid, and unsure of what to do next. The one piece of advice I always give is this: take that leap. You'll never know how far you can go until you try. Starting a business is terrifying, but it's also one of the most rewarding experiences you'll ever have. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, and the success will follow. I'm not saying it's easy. It wasn't. There were moments when I thought I was going to quit. Moments when I felt completely burned out, when everything seemed to be falling apart. But if you keep pushing, keep learning, and keep adapting, you can make it. That's the part no one tells you. It's not about the idea, it's about the perseverance. Stick with it, and you'll get there. To this day, I look back on that moment when I made my first sale, and I remember how it felt. It wasn't just about the money or the product. It was about realizing that anything is possible. I didn't start with much, but I had a vision, a willingness to work hard, and the drive to make it happen. And that's what made all the difference. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I grew up in a small town where the concept of success seemed like something reserved for people who lived in big cities. My parents worked hard. My dad was a mechanic, and my mom was a nurse. They taught me that success didn't come easily and that you had to work for it. But it wasn't until I was much older that I realized what they really meant. Working hard isn't enough, and success requires a combination of the right mindset, timing, and, above all, perseverance. When I graduated high school, I had no clear idea of what I wanted to do. The options felt vast, but I lacked direction. I considered college, but the thought of getting into debt and spending 4 more years in a classroom didn't appeal to me. Instead, I decided to dive into the workforce. I took up a few part-time jobs, working as a barista, delivering pizzas, and even doing some freelance work as a web designer. None of these jobs paid particularly well, but they gave me a sense of independence, and I was content with the flexibility they offered. Around this time, I met a guy named Ben. He was a few years older than me, and we became fast friends after bonding over a shared love of tech. Ben had a small startup that he was working on in his spare time, a tech consultancy that offered digital marketing and web development services. He had always been one of those people who saw the world in a different way. He was never satisfied with the status quo and was always pushing boundaries. Over time, he brought me on to help with some of the technical aspects of his business. I'll admit, I wasn't fully committed to the idea at first. I had no real understanding of how businesses worked, and even less of an understanding of how to market them. But Ben's passion was contagious, and he helped me see the potential in what we were doing. We weren't just offering services, we were solving problems. That mindset shift was pivotal. We worked out of his garage at first, brainstorming ideas for clients, designing websites, and crafting digital marketing strategies. But we hit a wall fairly quickly. We didn't have a brand, and we weren't getting the kind of traction we hoped for. It wasn't that we weren't good at what we did. Our work was solid, but the world didn't know we existed. So we decided to invest some of our savings into marketing, which, looking back, was one of the best decisions we made. We created a simple website for our business, a few social media profiles, and started running ads. For a while, nothing really happened. It was frustrating. We were putting money into ads and watching the analytics slowly tick upward, but it didn't feel like we were making any real progress. One night, after another disappointing day of seeing few results, I went to bed feeling discouraged. But Ben had a different perspective. He called me the next morning with an idea. What if we started offering free consultations? Let's make it a limited time offer. We could give people a taste of our services and show them how much we could help them. I was skeptical at first. It felt too generous. But Ben was insistent, and I figured it was worth a try. We ran a targeted ad campaign offering a free consultation with no strings attached. Within a week, we had a flood of inquiries. People were eager to talk to us about their businesses, and in return, we gained valuable insight into the problems they were facing. That's when we began landing clients. They were small businesses, mostly local, but we learned quickly that word of mouth and referrals were a powerful tool in growing a business. Each client we worked with helped us refine our service, and we began to grow our reputation in the community. By the end of our first year, we had 10 clients, and we were bringing in a modest income. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us going. That's when I realized something crucial. Starting a business wasn't about immediate profit. It was about building relationships, gaining trust, and learning. We weren't just selling services. We were providing value. The value we provided to our clients was what made them come back, and more importantly, it made them refer us to others. By the second year, we started getting bigger clients, small chains, and larger companies. We brought on 2 more employees to help manage the increased workload, and I started to see our business in a new light. It wasn't just a side project anymore. It was a company. We were a team, and I began to understand what it meant to lead. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, nights where I questioned if we were doing the right thing, and frustrations that came with managing a growing team. But with each challenge came a solution, and with each solution, we moved closer to our vision. But success didn't come without sacrifices. Ben and I worked around the clock, and we often found ourselves missing important events in our personal lives. Friendships and relationships suffered, and I was beginning to feel burnt out. One particularly hard week, I sat down and had a long conversation with Ben about the future. It wasn't that we were unhappy with what we had built. It was that we had become so focused on growth that we had forgotten why we started in the first place. It was during this conversation that we decided to pivot. We chose to focus more on the clients we loved working with and less on trying to scale to the point where we felt like we had to take on any business just to survive. That decision marked a turning point for us. We started to focus on quality, not quantity, and began building a brand that reflected our values. We became known for our personal touch, the care we put into each project, and the results we achieved for our clients. In the end, we grew our business into something sustainable. We had a team of 15, a strong client base, and a reputation that kept us busy with work we were proud of. It wasn't easy, and there were many times I felt like giving up. But looking back, I realized that the hardest moments were the ones that taught me the most. They shaped who I am today. Entrepreneurship isn't about making a quick buck or having the perfect idea. It's about resilience, perseverance, and knowing when to pivot. It's about understanding that success is a long game and that the most important thing is to stay true to your values. If I've learned anything from this journey, it's that success isn't just about the destination. It's about the lessons you learn along the way and the relationships you build. I was in my late 20s, living in a tiny apartment with barely enough money to pay rent and eating instant noodles 3 meals a day. The dreams I had for myself seemed as far away as the moon, and my day-to-day life revolved around scraping by and staying out of debt. But, as every great entrepreneur story begins, something in me clicked. I decided I couldn't keep living like this. It started with a small, seemingly insignificant idea. I was an avid gamer, and one day, while browsing through an online forum, I saw a post about custom-made accessories for gaming consoles. People were discussing things like personalized controller designs, custom skins, and limited edition gadgets. It was a niche market, but I saw a potential goldmine. The idea gnawed at me for weeks. I started to research it, looking into where I could source materials and what kind of profit margins could be made. The more I looked, the more convinced I became. This was it, my ticket out of financial struggle. The next step was figuring out how to make this happen. I had no experience in manufacturing, design, or even business management, but I had a drive to learn. My first major investment was a second-hand 3D printer. I borrowed a bit of money from family, convinced that this could be the start of something big. The printer was basic, but it was enough to test prototypes and get my feet wet. I spent nights learning how to use the machine, designing custom gaming accessories from scratch. I wasn't sure if the world would want them, but I knew I had to give it a shot. The first few months were rough. I created a website to showcase my products, and I spent countless hours researching SEO, social media strategies, and even emailing influencers to try to get the word out. Sales were slow at first, painfully slow. I'd get 1 or 2 orders a week, and most of the time, they came from friends and family who were just trying to support my dream. I didn't give up, though. I kept learning, tweaking my website, and improving my designs. I remember being so frustrated at times, wondering if this was ever going to work, but then I'd get a message from a customer saying how much they loved their custom controller or how excited they were to see new products. That kept me going. The breakthrough came one random Tuesday morning. I had just finished a new design, a custom gaming controller skin inspired by a popular video game. It was sleek, eye-catching, and had an element of uniqueness that I hadn't seen in the market before. I posted it on a gaming subreddit, not expecting much. To my surprise, it blew up. Within hours, the post had thousands of upvotes, and my website traffic spiked. I had my first viral moment. Suddenly, people were ordering like crazy. The sales numbers exploded, and I had more orders than I could fulfill. It was a good problem to have, but a problem nonetheless. I had to scramble to figure out how to scale the business. I couldn't keep up with demand using the second-hand 3D printer anymore. I needed to invest in more advanced equipment, but I didn't have the funds. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I took out a small loan. It was risky, but I knew that if I didn't act fast, I would lose this momentum. With the loan, I was able to purchase a commercial-grade 3D printer, which was a game-changer. I also hired a part-time assistant to help with order fulfillment. Things were moving quickly now, but it wasn't smooth sailing yet. I made plenty of mistakes along the way. I misjudged inventory, miscalculated shipping costs, and even got some customer orders wrong. The stress was intense. There were nights when I hardly slept, fearing that I would lose everything I had worked so hard for. But each time something went wrong, I learned from it and adapted. As I continued to grow the business, I realized that simply having a good product wasn't enough. I needed to create a brand, a community. So I started engaging with my customers more directly. I created social media pages where I shared behind-the-scenes content, posted customer reviews, and ran contests where people could submit their own designs for a chance to have them produced. The community grew quickly, and I found that my customers weren't just buying products. They were investing in the brand and the idea that they were part of something special. By the end of the first year, I had paid off the loan and was making enough profit to start reinvesting back into the business. I upgraded my website, expanded the product line, and even started hiring full-time employees to help with customer support and production. I was no longer just a guy with a second-hand printer in his apartment. I was the CEO of a growing business with a loyal customer base and a reputation for quality and creativity. But even with success, there were still challenges. The market was becoming more competitive, and I had to constantly innovate to stay ahead. I started collaborating with influencers, creating limited edition products, and even sponsoring gaming events to get my brand in front of a larger audience. It wasn't easy, but I was hungry for success, and every failure felt like a stepping stone. 2 years into the business, I made a huge leap. I had saved up enough money to open a small studio and hire a team of designers. This allowed me to take my business to the next level. We started designing not just custom skins and accessories, but entire themed gaming setups, from custom desks to LED lights and wall art. I couldn't believe how far we had come, and the excitement of it all was overwhelming. The real turning point came when I was approached by a major gaming retailer who wanted to carry my products in their stores. They had been following my brand's growth on social media and were impressed with the community I had built. After months of negotiations, I signed a deal to have my products sold in retail stores nationwide. The sense of accomplishment was surreal, but I couldn't let it distract me. I had to keep pushing forward. Looking back on those early days, I realized how much I've changed. I went from a broke, uncertain guy to a successful entrepreneur with a growing business. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of sleepless nights and moments of doubt. But I learned that success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning from it and being relentless in your pursuit of what you want. Now, as I look at my business and the community we've built, I can't help but feel proud. The struggle was worth it, and I'm more driven than ever to keep growing, innovating, and making an impact in the gaming world. I hope my story serves as a reminder to anyone who feels stuck in their life or business. You might not see the path at first, but if you keep pushing forward, even through the hard times, you'll find your way. I'm proof of that. I was 22 years old when I first dipped my toes into the world of entrepreneurship. To put it bluntly, I had no idea what I was doing. But that's how most stories start, right? with someone who's eager, naive, and determined enough to figure it out on the go. My story starts with a failed venture and an enormous amount of debt, but somehow, it didn't end there. When I graduated from college, I had the same idea as most of my peers: get a job in a stable field and work my way up. The problem was, I couldn't sit still. My mind was always thinking of ways to do things better, faster, or differently. I started reading about startups, tech companies, and how people made their fortunes by simply being different. And just like that, I was hooked. I began daydreaming about creating something of my own, something that could leave a mark on the world. But there was one major problem. I had no experience and no money. One late night, after scrolling through dozens of YouTube videos on how to start your own business, I came across a popular video that promised to teach you how to create a $1 million idea from nothing. The catch? They said you didn't need any investment, just creativity and hustle. I thought, if they can do it, so can I. I watched the video and bought the course. The course turned out to be a series of motivational speeches and a couple of slides about hustling. But one thing stuck with me: find a problem, solve it, and the money will follow. It sounded simple enough, and I spent the next couple of weeks jotting down problems I thought people had in their everyday lives. I thought about what bothered me the most and realized something. I hated how disorganized my workspace was. I had wires everywhere, my phone chargers were always tangled, and my desk always seemed cluttered. That's when I came up with my first idea: an ergonomic desk organizer that could also organize cables and charge devices. At first, I was ecstatic. I thought I had invented something revolutionary. So, I took a portion of my savings and spent it on materials to prototype my product. I spent weeks designing and crafting it with my hands, using YouTube tutorials to learn how to use 3D modeling software and basic electronics. It wasn't the best product in the world, but I was convinced it was going to be my ticket to success. When I finally had my first prototype, I realized I had no idea what to do with it. I had no connections to manufacturers, no experience with marketing, and no website. But I was determined. I spent hours cold emailing manufacturers, trying to convince them to produce my product. After weeks of hearing nothing but no's, I finally found a small manufacturer willing to work with me. The only problem was the cost. To produce just 500 units, I needed around $10,000, and I didn't have that kind of money. So, I took out a loan. Looking back, it was probably one of the riskiest decisions of my life, but I didn't see it that way at the time. I was confident that once I had the product in hand, everything else would fall into place. I launched a Kickstarter campaign, using the money I borrowed to fund the production. I put together a video of me explaining how great my product was, and I offered early bird pricing to get people excited. I remember waiting for the first backer to appear. It took an agonizing 24 hours for the first pledge to come in. My heart raced. I was ecstatic. But after the initial excitement wore off, reality began to hit. The campaign was struggling. I wasn't getting the traction I hoped for. A few pledges trickled in, but nowhere near enough to hit my goal. The whole experience was overwhelming. I was trying to manage everything on my own: customer service, product development, social media, and it quickly became too much. I realized that I needed help. So, I hired a freelance marketer to help me with the Kickstarter campaign. It was an expensive decision, but I had no other option. Slowly but surely, things started picking up. The marketer knew how to target the right audience and create ads that converted. But just as things started looking up, disaster struck. I received a message from the manufacturer saying that they couldn't meet the deadline for production. The factory had encountered some supply chain issues, and it would be another 2 months before they could deliver the product. I was crushed. My backers were starting to get impatient, and some of them started asking for refunds. I knew that if I didn't fulfill the orders soon, I would lose my reputation before I even had a chance to build it. I had to think quickly. I reached out to other manufacturers, but they all had similar delays. The problem wasn't just that I was a small startup with no leverage. The problem was that I had underestimated how complex this whole process was. I learned a hard lesson. Business isn't just about having an idea and launching it. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that you don't see in the success stories. At that point, I almost gave up. But I had already invested so much money and time into this project, I couldn't let it fail. I ended up refunding a large portion of my backers, but I also promised that I would keep them updated on the progress of the product. I spent the next few months sourcing new suppliers, making sure that every piece of the product was high quality and learning how to handle customer service. Eventually, I got the product delivered. It wasn't a massive success, but it wasn't a failure either. I didn't make a fortune, but I learned more than I ever could have imagined. And through all the mistakes and setbacks, I found something even more valuable: the resilience to keep going. After the first product launch, I started focusing on scaling my business. I took what I learned from my Kickstarter campaign and used it to launch a second product, this time a simpler one. The second product was a hit. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was practical and well-made. The orders started flowing in, and I was able to pay off my debts. I reinvested everything back into the business and started hiring a small team to help. We grew steadily, and I learned how to navigate the complexities of manufacturing, logistics, and marketing. My failures had taught me lessons that I would carry for the rest of my entrepreneurial journey. Fast forward to today, and I now run a small but profitable company. I'm far from a millionaire, but I'm able to support myself and my team. And most importantly, I love what I do. Entrepreneurship isn't easy, and it's not glamorous. There are days when everything feels like it's falling apart, and you wonder if you're ever going to make it. But in the end, it's about persistence, learning from your mistakes, and never giving up. So, if you're out there thinking about starting a business, don't wait for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. There will always be obstacles. But if you stay committed, if you keep learning, and if you're willing to take risks, you'll find your way through. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. I used to think entrepreneurs were born, not made. My dad ran a failing hardware store for 20 years, and I watched him get crushed under the weight of every recession, competitor, and missed opportunity. So naturally, I went to college, got a job in corporate logistics, and tried to pretend that watching him struggle didn't make me terrified of ever running something myself. But the truth is, the entrepreneurial itch never left. I didn't want to own a store like him, but I wanted to build something people actually needed. I just had no idea what that was until I got laid off. This was January 2021. The company was restructuring post-COVID. My severance was decent, but I had no backup plan. I spent 2 weeks doing nothing but scrolling Twitter, drinking coffee, and sending out resumes with robotic cover letters. Then I stumbled into a tweet that changed everything. It said, "If you solved a problem for yourself and others would pay for it, you're sitting on a business." I remember this spreadsheet I'd built for work, an internal shipping audit tool. It cut our monthly invoice errors down by 30%, and a few colleagues had asked me to send them copies. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. I wondered, could I build this into a product? Spoiler, I could, but not in the way I thought. I bought a domain name for $12.99, set up a basic website using Webflow, and named it ShipRight. My value prop was straightforward: audit your carrier invoices, flag overcharges, and file claims automatically. I used my severance to hire a freelance developer off Upwork to turn my spreadsheet logic into a web app. The first version was incredibly janky. Think, one input box, a confusing upload interface, and bugs that made people email me in all caps. But I had one thing going for me: logistics people hate losing money to shipping errors. And most SMBs don't have the time or staff to audit their invoices manually. I started cold emailing e-commerce stores, hundreds per week. My hit rate was brutal. But by March, I had my first paying customer. A Shopify seller that was spending $12K/month on shipping and had never once filed a refund claim. That first check, $99 for a monthly subscription, felt like $1,000,000. It proved someone would pay for this. I focused all my energy on improving the product. I learned just enough Python to fix bugs myself. I added a Zapier integration to automate claim filing. I joined indie hacker communities and soaked up every piece of feedback like gospel. Within 6 months, I had 50 customers and was making $5,000 MRR. Then came my first punch in the gut. FedEx changed their API, and my entire app broke. I woke up to 37 angry emails and refund requests. The contractor I'd hired had moved on. I had no backup, no fix, and no idea how to rewrite the backend myself. I almost gave up right there. But instead of panicking, I posted a very transparent update to all customers, offered prorated refunds, and pulled a couple of all-nighters to rebuild the integration using their new documentation. It sucked, but I didn't lose all my customers. In fact, a few emailed me saying they appreciated the honesty and quick turnaround. That's when I realized that trust, not just code, was the real foundation of this business. By year one, Shipwright was making $12K MRR. That's when the VC offers started coming. Now, I didn't build this to raise money. I didn't even really know how. But I kept getting DMs from early-stage investors asking if I was raising. One guy flew me to San Francisco during a pandemic just to pitch over ramen. I turned them all down. I was scared of losing control. I'd watched my dad refuse outside help, and maybe I'd inherited that same stubborn gene. That might have been a mistake. Because scaling past $15K MRR without help was like dragging a cart uphill barefoot. I couldn't afford a full-time developer. I was handling customer support, marketing, and bug fixes myself. Burnout crept in like fog. I stopped sleeping well. I started to dread logging in to check support tickets. In December 2022, I hit a wall. I had $40K in the bank and was seriously thinking about selling the business. I even listed it anonymously on MicroAcquire and got a few nibbles. Then I got an email from a customer I'd onboarded 6 months earlier. She ran a mid-sized fulfillment center in Ohio. She said Shipwright had helped her recover over $15K in billing errors and asked if I'd ever considered partnering directly with 3PLs. That email flipped a switch in my brain. I started reaching out to fulfillment centers. They had the shipping volume, the pain point, and, unlike most Shopify sellers, they understood logistics. I offered white-label versions of Shipwright for a revenue share. Within 3 months, I'd signed 5 centers and doubled my revenue. Suddenly, I had cash again. I hired a full-time developer, the best decision I've ever made. We rebuilt the app from the ground up, this time with multi-carrier support, analytics dashboards, and an actual UI designer involved. By mid-2023, Shipwright was doing $45K MRR. I finally allowed myself a real vacation. I went to Portugal for 2 weeks and didn't open my laptop once. I remember sitting on a beach in Lagos with a drink in hand thinking, this is what I imagined when I started. Now it's 2025. Shipwright just crossed $100K MRR. We're a team of 7, fully remote. I still own 100% of the company. I've turned down acquisition offers, though I won't lie, some of them were tempting. People ask me what made Shipwright succeed when so many fail. My answer is this. I built a boring product for a boring problem that a specific group of people actually wanted solved. I didn't chase trends. I solved one real, painful issue. And I stuck with it even when it sucked. Also, I just worked like hell. There's no secret there. Sometimes I wonder what my dad would think. His store closed the year before Shipwright launched. He never got to see me become an entrepreneur. But I like to think he'd be proud that I did it in my own way. Not by following a blueprint. Just by solving a problem, one error at a time. I never intended to become an entrepreneur. In fact, the word entrepreneur used to give me mild anxiety. It always sounded like a gamble, like some mythical beast of hustle and networking and 20-hour days fueled by Red Bull and sheer willpower. That wasn't me. Or at least, I didn't think it was. I was a project manager at a mid-sized software company in Indianapolis. I made good money, had a solid routine, and generally coasted through life without too much turbulence. The problem was, I wasn't happy. Not in a dramatic, soul-crushing way, just flat. I'd wake up, go to work, solve other people's problems for 9 hours, and come home feeling like I hadn't done anything that really mattered. The idea started with my neighbor, Chris. He's one of those guys who always has a side hustle. Flipping furniture, selling sneakers, whatever. One day, we were sitting in his garage drinking beer and talking about lawn care. I just complained that my HOA fined me for not edging my sidewalk properly, and he joked that I should build a robot to do it for me. That was it. Just a throwaway line. But for some reason, it stuck with me. I went home that night and sketched something out. Not a full robot, just a wheeled platform that could follow a sidewalk edge and cut along it cleanly. I have a background in systems engineering, and I'd built some Raspberry Pi projects before, so the tech wasn't totally foreign. I stayed up until 3 a.m. looking into small motors and sensors, and by the end of the weekend, I had a rough prototype. Clunky as hell, but it edged my driveway without crashing into my garage. I posted a video of it on Reddit, just for kicks. It blew up. Like, tens of thousands of upvotes in r/DIY and r/robotics. I got dozens of messages asking if I was selling them. I wasn't, of course. It was made from 3D printed parts, duct tape, and an old weed whacker. But the reaction woke something up in me. Over the next few months, I kept refining it. Nights and weekends turned into early mornings and skipped lunches. My job performance started to dip, and my manager pulled me into a meeting to ask if everything was okay. I lied and said I was just tired from house stuff. When I finally had a working prototype that looked half decent, I launched a simple website with a pre-order page. I set the price at $349 and figured if I got 50 orders, I'd take it seriously. I got 312 orders in 2 weeks. I panicked. I had no manufacturing plan, no shipping process, and no real supply chain. My business was just me, a soldering iron, and a pile of lithium batteries in my garage. I considered refunding everyone and pretending it never happened, but Chris wouldn't let me. He offered to help assemble units if I paid him in pizza and beer. So we did it. We fulfilled every order over the next 3 months. It was a nightmare. Components arrived late. One batch of motors was defective. 2 customers threatened to report me to the BBB because their bots arrived with scratches. But we made it through. That first batch taught me everything I know about production. After that, I filed for an LLC and named the company Trimly. I hired a local high school senior part-time to help with packaging and customer support. I reinvested every dollar we made into refining the product. I took a small loan from my 401k to build better tooling and set up a small workshop space. Things really took off when a YouTuber in the DIY space made a review video. It got over 1 million views. Overnight, traffic to our website exploded. We had to shut down orders because I didn't want to sell something we couldn't deliver. I knew I needed to scale. I reached out to a former coworker who had started a logistics company, and he helped me find a contract manufacturer in Ohio. I flew out, pitched them on Trimly, and convinced them to take a chance on a small batch of 1,000 units. They weren't cheap, but they were consistent. No more defective motors. No more soldering in my garage. Around that time, I quit my day job. It was terrifying. I had a 6-figure salary, health benefits, and a 401k match. Walking away from that to run a lawn-edging robot company felt insane. But I couldn't ignore the momentum anymore. The next version of the product, Trimly Edge 2.0, launched 6 months later. We sold out in a week. We started getting emails from landscaping companies asking about bulk purchases. A Canadian distributor reached out. It was real now. I hired a small team. A marketing guy, a mechanical engineer, and a customer service lead. We moved into a proper office with a workshop attached. I finally stopped working 80-hour weeks. Well, I stopped most of the time. We hit $1 million in revenue about 18 months after the first prototype. Profit margins were slim, but it didn't matter. We were building something people wanted. We also started working on a commercial version for landscaping businesses, and that opened a whole new market. Of course, not everything went smoothly. Our third model had a software bug that caused it to veer off course randomly. We had to recall 600 units. It cost us almost $70K. I felt like I was going to throw up when we announced the recall. But we owned it, fixed the bug, and customers appreciated the transparency. Now, 3 years in, we've grown to a team of 14. We've shipped over 12,000 units across the US and Canada. We're profitable, and we haven't taken a dime of VC money. I still get nervous before every product launch, and I still answer support tickets sometimes when the team's swamped. But I wouldn't trade this for anything. People ask me what made it work. Was it the product? The Reddit post? Luck? All of it. But mostly, it was following a dumb idea all the way to the end of the road. Not because I was confident it would work, but because I couldn't stop thinking about it. If you've got one of those ideas, the kind that keeps pulling you back in after work, after dinner, even when you're exhausted, build it. Worst case, you learn something. Best case, you change your life. Just make sure you've got plenty of duct tape. I'm not entirely sure why I'm writing this. Maybe to get it off my chest. Maybe to help someone who's stuck where I was 4 years ago. My startup journey wasn't flashy. No sudden virality. No $1 million funding round. No TED Talks. But I made it work, after failing twice and almost losing everything I had. I now run a business that makes about $40K/month net. It's not sexy, but it's stable, and more than anything, it's mine. I'll take you back to late 2019. I was working a dull marketing job for a mid-sized logistics company. It paid okay, but I hated every second of it. The kind of job where you refresh the clock more than your email. I was freelancing on the side doing Facebook ads for some e-com clients. mostly Shopify stores run by kids with dropshipping dreams. That's where I got my first taste of freedom $801 month, $2,000 the next. It was inconsistent, but addictive. By early 2020, I decided to go full-time freelance. I had maybe $12K in savings and a handful of recurring clients. I figured I could float for 3 to 4 months even if everything went south. I thought I was ready. Spoiler, I wasn't. COVID hit, and nearly all my clients paused or canceled their campaigns. By May, I was down to one retainer client paying me $750/month. I panicked. I applied for jobs again, even reached out to my old boss. But no one was hiring marketers, especially not ones who'd just walked out 6 months ago. That's when I stumbled on what would later become my business. A friend from a Facebook group asked if I could help set up a custom email flow for his SaaS company. He couldn't afford a real agency, but he'd pay $500 for a working version. I hadn't done it before, but I said yes. I stayed up for 2 nights watching tutorials, reading documentation, and duct taped the system together in ActiveCampaign. It worked. A week later, he referred me to 2 others. Word spread. In 3 months, I had about 10 SaaS clients, all small-time founders looking to improve onboarding and retention through email automation. I realized this was a niche barely being served properly. Most email marketing agencies were focused on e-com. SaaS founders were DIYing it or getting generic advice. So I decided to go all in. I branded myself as a lifecycle marketing consultant for SaaS. I redid my site, put up some case studies, and started cold emailing early-stage SaaS founders like a man possessed. I must have sent 300+ cold emails every month for the next 4 months. Response rate was trash, less than 2%, but I kept going. Every lead that came through, I treated like gold. By early 2021, I had 25 clients and was making close to $14K/month. But I was drowning. Every day was a mix of calls, copywriting, segmentation, troubleshooting. I was doing everything: sales, strategy, execution, revisions, even invoicing. The burnout hit hard. I ended up in the ER one night with what I thought was a heart attack. It wasn't. It was just panic. A nurse asked if I was under a lot of stress. I laughed and almost cried. That night, I decided I couldn't do it all alone anymore. I hired my first contractor, a copywriter from Twitter, then a Klaviyo tech guy. I trained them myself, paid them fairly, and slowly offloaded tasks. It was terrifying at first. Watching your margin shrink hurts, but the relief was worth every penny. 2022 was the year things turned into a real business. I turned my solo consultancy into a boutique agency. We rebranded to a proper name, Inbox Intel, and I invested in a basic brand identity. I focused on productizing our services, onboarding emails, reactivation flows, SaaS churn campaigns, etc., each with a fixed scope and price. This made selling 10x easier. No more customized quotes or ambiguous timelines. We got into a rhythm. I'd handle high-level strategy and sales, and my team handled fulfillment. I built templates, SOPs, and used Notion religiously. We even made a little internal dashboard to track campaigns. Our average client paid $500/month. Churn was low because SaaS companies really do value retention. We didn't scale fast, but we scaled steadily. Revenue hit $30K/month, then $40K. Profit margin stayed around 50 to 60%. I paid myself $10K/month, banked the rest, and built a cash cushion. I also took my first real vacation in 3 years and cried on the flight home because I hadn't realized how exhausted I'd been. There were hiccups along the way. A long-term client ghosted us on a $6,000 invoice. A contractor quit without notice the week before a big deadline. I had a mild bout of depression mid-2023 when I felt stuck, like I'd built a treadmill instead of an escape. But I got through it, mostly by remembering what life was like when I had to beg clients to pay $300 for a welcome flow. Today, we're a team of 7, 3 full-time and 4 contractors. We don't aspire to be a giant agency. We're staying small, lean, and selective. I turn down more clients than I take on, and weirdly, that makes them want to work with us more. We even launched a small course on SaaS onboarding flows that made $40K in its first launch. I used to think selling info products was a scam, but if you actually know your stuff, it's not. I'm not rich, but I'm free. I work 20 to 25 hours a week, spend time with my wife and 2-year-old, and finally got around to building that backyard shed office I used to dream about. So here's what I'd tell my 2019 self. Forget the big swing. You don't need to invent the next Uber. Find a group of people with a painful problem, learn to solve it better than anyone else, and get really good at telling them about it. Then build systems so you don't become your own employee. And take a damn break once in a while. You'll thank yourself later. I never meant to start a business. It began because my landlord forgot to fix the broken hot water pipe in January. At the time, I was a 28-year-old mid-level data analyst working remotely in Milwaukee. I had been laid off during the pandemic and got rehired by a fintech startup that let us work from anywhere. That January, my apartment lost hot water for 3 days. I sent a few polite emails, but nothing happened. I finally bought a cheap camping shower and used my electric kettle to heat water in buckets. That miserable week got me thinking about temporary fixes for everyday problems. The kind that aren't major enough to call emergency services, but are annoying enough to disrupt your life. I jotted down a few ideas in my notebook: portable heated mats for cold floors, plug-in steamers for frozen pipes, and temporary water heaters. But one idea stuck with me. What if I made a modular repair kit for renters? Think IKEA meets Home Depot, but for people who can't drill holes in walls or permanently change anything. After 2 months of research and some light prototyping, I built a rough draft of what I called the Renter's Rescue Kit. It had a heat tracing tape that could safely wrap around pipes, adhesive insulation pads, and a detachable shower head powered by a small rechargeable battery that could warm water for a 5-minute rinse. Everything fit in a plastic bin the size of a shoebox. I showed it to a couple of friends. One of them laughed. Another said, "I'd pay $100 for this if my landlord ghosted me again." I didn't take it seriously until April, when my buddy Ethan, who runs an eBay flipping side hustle, said, "You could Kickstarter this." No joke. This is the kind of thing people talk about on TikTok and buy at 2 a.m. So that night, I put together a 2-minute video using iMovie, posted it to Reddit, and started building a basic campaign on Kickstarter. I called the product Hotfix. It didn't go viral or anything, but it got enough traction that I hit my modest goal of $7, 509 days. I remember watching the pledges come in from New York, Seattle, and Toronto, cities where people knew the pain of renting in winter. I didn't even have a real manufacturer at that point. I spent the next 6 weeks cold emailing plastic fabricators and heating component suppliers, trying to cobble together 300 units of a product I'd barely tested beyond my apartment sink. I finally found a small shop in Madison that agreed to do a short run if I could pay up front. That was the first real moment of fear, when I wired them $4, 200 of my Kickstarter money and had no legal contract, no formal business, just a gut feeling that this was worth doing. By July, we shipped our first batch. 15 people emailed me saying they loved it. 3 people complained the water heater broke after 1 use. One guy offered to invest $10,000 if I ever made a version with solar panels. That fall, I used the rest of the money to create a cleaner version of the kit. This time, I branded it properly, used injection molding for the parts, and partnered with a fulfillment center. I was working nights and weekends, packing boxes, handling support emails, watching YouTube videos on e-commerce strategies. Then, my boss called me in December and said the company was pivoting and eliminating most remote roles. I was laid off. Again. So I made a choice. I cashed out a small IRA, took a part-time contract role to cover rent, and decided to give Hotfix a full 6 months. I rebuilt the website using Shopify, started making TikToks showing the product in action, with me pretending to be various frustrated tenants, and emailed about 80 influencers offering free kits. One video took off. It was a woman in Chicago reviewing Hotfix after her pipes froze in a 10 degrees Fahrenheit snap. She posted it on Instagram Reels and TikTok. Within 24 hours, I had 400 orders. I had 38 kits left in stock. That week, I pre-sold 1,300 kits with a 2-month lead time. I was honest about the delay and offered refunds. Less than 5% canceled. I got a line of credit using my new revenue projections and rented a small office. A college friend helped me build out a streamlined version of the product with better safety certifications and a sleeker design. We renamed it Rintro after some branding feedback, shorter, more modern, and better for SEO. By year 2, we'd sold 8,000 units. I had 3 full-time employees and a contract warehouse. We added kits for air conditioning leaks, drafty windows, and mold prevention. Each kit sold for $139 with a cost of goods around $41. Our margins were good, and our return rate was low. I was still handling customer support myself. I remember answering a 2 a.m. email from someone in Philly who said, "This saved me from having to shower at Planet Fitness for the 3rd week in a row." I pinned that email to my wall. Rintro now makes about $1.3 million a year in revenue. We're profitable. We're small, scrappy, and still testing new kits. Right now we're piloting a pet emergency kit for apartment dwellers with dogs who can't go outside in extreme weather. Sometimes people ask me how I knew this would work. I didn't. I wasn't a builder, not really. I was a renter with a grudge and a space heater. But there was this feeling that millions of people dealt with low-grade disasters every month and nobody took them seriously. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't disruptive. It was just annoying. And if you can make a business out of solving annoyances people are too tired to fix themselves, you might be onto something. My old landlord actually ordered a Rintro kit last winter. No idea if he remembers me. But when I saw the shipping address, I smiled. That broken water pipe was the best thing that ever happened to me. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. Growing up, I thought entrepreneurship was for people who were either already rich or were charismatic sociopaths who wore suits with no socks and used words like synergy without flinching. I was neither. I was the kid who memorized cheat codes for Roller Coaster Tycoon and got nervous calling to order pizza. But 2 years ago, I accidentally started a business because of a broken vacuum cleaner and a YouTube comment section. Back in 2021, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the middle of nowhere, working remote tech support for a software company that seemed to invent new layers of bureaucracy weekly. Every meeting was a meeting about another meeting. I was burning out and I knew it. The spark happened on a Saturday morning. I was vacuuming, or trying to, when the thing just gave out with a wheeze and a mechanical death rattle. I opened it up and found the belt had snapped. No big deal, I thought. I hit Google, then Amazon, then the manufacturer's site. No belt. They had discontinued the model. I looked on YouTube, thinking maybe someone had a workaround. I found a video titled, "Fix Your Hoover 3500 with this hack. No belt needed," with like 20,000 views. It was uploaded by a guy named Larry Fixes Things, who looked like your uncle that buys fireworks illegally. In the comments, someone said, "Thanks, Larry. This worked, but I wish someone sold a kit with all these parts already." That comment stuck with me. I had an old 3D printer gathering dust in my closet. I was bored and annoyed. So I decided to try making one of the replacement parts Larry had hacked together using coat hangers and glue. It took 5 tries, and the part looked like a melted Lego, but it worked. I printed 3 more, bundled them with a cheap replacement belt I found from an off-brand supplier, threw in a printed instruction sheet with screenshots from Larry's video with credit, and posted it on eBay as the Hoover 3500 DIY repair kit. I priced it at $14.99, thinking if I sold 5 in a month, I'd at least recoup the plastic in time. I sold 13 kits in 2 weeks, then 27 the next month, then 60. People started messaging me asking if I had kits for other vacuum models. I didn't, but the requests were oddly specific, so I started keeping a spreadsheet of them. I also messaged Larry. Turned out he was a retired mechanic in Idaho who had no interest in selling anything but thought what I was doing was cool as hell. He gave me permission to use screenshots and even let me link to his channel in my instruction manuals. That's when I realized I might be onto something. I took $300 from my savings, ordered a slightly better 3D printer, and bought more plastic filament in various colors. My tiny kitchen table became an assembly station. My evenings were now dedicated to making vacuum parts and stuffing padded envelopes while watching reruns of Parks and Rec. Then one day in March, I got an email from someone claiming to be from a large vacuum repair shop in Arizona. They said they wanted to buy 100 kits in bulk. I thought it was a scam at first. I even Googled the address, called the number listed on their Yelp page, and awkwardly asked, "Did you guys email someone about 100 vacuum kits?" They had. I didn't have the inventory, so I faked it. I said yes, invoiced them using a free template I found online, then stayed up until 4 a.m. for 2 weeks printing, assembling, and shipping those kits. I delivered them 3 days late, but they paid. $1 for 100. I registered an LLC that same week. Called it Dustfix Company. Fast forward 6 months. I'd launched a Shopify site, hired my cousin to help with packaging, and was making $3K to $5K per month in profit. I expanded the product line to include kits for 7 other discontinued vacuums, all based on YouTube repair videos and forum posts. But things weren't perfect. My printer broke twice under the load. I got a few bad reviews from people who didn't read the instructions. One guy accused me of trying to scam old people. That one stung. I hit a wall in early 2023. Orders were growing faster than I could manage, but I didn't have the capital or confidence to scale. I felt like I was drowning in packing tape and refund emails. Then came the game changer. Someone on Reddit posted a photo of one of my kits with the caption, "Saved my grandma's vacuum with this $15 repair kit instead of buying a $400 replacement. Thank you, Dustfix." It hit the front page of /r/frugal and /r/DIY. Overnight, I got 700 orders. I closed the site for 2 days to catch up. Then I did something terrifying. I took out a $15,000 small business loan and rented a 300 square foot workshop. I hired a part-time college student from the local tech school to run printers and prep orders. I also reached out to 3 of the YouTubers whose videos had helped me build the other kits, offering them affiliate codes and a flat fee for co-branding. 2 said yes. 1, a woman named Jen Fixit, made a full video reviewing my kits and called it a business that's fixing capitalism one broken vacuum at a time. I cried a little watching it. By the end of 2023, Dustfix Company had sold 18,000 kits. Revenue for the year was just over $210K. Profit? Around $72K. I paid off the loan early. I finally quit my tech job in February 2024. Today, we have kits for 23 vacuum models, including 3 international ones. I've got 2 full-time employees, and we're moving into repairing other small appliances. Toasters are next. I never meant to become an entrepreneur. I still don't wear suits. But I do know the exact torque needed to hand-tighten a Hoover brush roller without snapping it. And weirdly, that feels like power. People ask me now if I have advice. I do. Don't chase the next big thing. Watch for small, persistent problems. The kinds people post about once, then give up on. Fix one of them, then another. And be ready to print like hell at 2 a.m. when Reddit discovers you. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.